This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Today, we've got for you a webinar that we recorded with Sean Carson of Sales Empowerment Group. Sean helps to head up the private equity practice there. They do a tremendous job on revenue growth strategies with private equity sponsored companies and mid-market companies. We'll work through a whole range of issues with Sean Carson today. Thank you for listening to this Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast webinar. Thank you.
Sean, can you take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us about Sales Empowerment Group?
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. And thank you all for joining us today. We're excited to chat a little bit more. As Scott mentioned, I'm an executive within the organization where we are a growth services firm, and we use that terminology intentionally. Everything we do is designed to help accelerate organic revenue and top line growth for businesses. And, where we found ourselves highly concentrated was working over the past several years with a lot of mid-market organizations who had financing through private equity partnerships. And so we've established ourselves as a trusted advisor and partner to over 35 firms today and growing, really to help drive efficiency in commercial organizations. And so, excited to chat with you today and answer any questions, share a little bit of perspective and what we're seeing based on the number of businesses that we're working with, and some of the challenges and successes that we're having along that journey.
And Sean, take a second on, for private equity sponsored companies, the import of organic growth versus bolt-on growth, particularly in a changing world. How important is organic growth in an organic growth strategy? Can you give us a moment there?
Yeah, it's critically important. And, this culminated around the same time that we started to see significant run-ups in interest rates. And so as you imagine, those of you who are involved with or oriented to the private capital spaces, that has a direct impact on, how businesses can operate and the freedom to fund strategic and growth initiatives. So there's an old saying, like, revenue solves a lot of problems. When you think about maximizing enterprise value, you can do that two ways. You can increase organic top line, or you can go buy and bolt on and build bigger businesses. And many organizations look to execute both. But there's definitely a priority on the organic top line because it's, generally speaking, when done correctly, the most capital efficient approach to increasing enterprise value for an organization. Less risk, integrations always carry risk. There's certainly other components that are challenging with respect to M&A. And so, what we tend to do is help our organizations, clients, and partners really, really get smart and focused on sufficient ways to execute that top line growth strategies. And that takes a ton of different shapes, which I know we're going to talk a little bit more here in a few moments.
Right. But your point is so well taken that the organic growth doesn't require debt, doesn't require bolt-on transactions, doesn't require interaction. It just requires accelerating and building out the team and the right strategies. I'm going to ask you two questions to follow right on top of each other. How did you start working with private equity sponsored companies? And then we're going to talk about how our go-to-market strategy is evolving in today's world. Tell us how you started in the private equity sponsored world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So my journey began over 12 years ago. I was working with a large enterprise business, and we had successfully built a strategic sales channel outside of the private equity ecosystem that gained a ton of momentum. And executives at that organization had tasked a few of us across the business to come up with a thesis and where we could replicate that success. And we started actually in the VC community. And what we learned early on is that, venture capital is sufficient. They're invested and involved with many, many businesses, but there was lacking, some control elements with respect to where and how we could accelerate decision making. And so we landed on private equity. And I was fortunate to participate in a long tenure in building that practice out. And as a function of that, came across our sponsor. So a Sales Empowerment Group is actually owned by a private equity firm called RFE Investment Partners, and got very close to the thesis that we had built here and understood that in the delivery that we're putting forth, it's pretty low risk, high reward outcomes relative to some other areas. And so that's really a little bit about me and about the business. SEG, or Sales Empowerment Group, was a founder-led organization that had organically developed concentrated clients within a handful of private equity partners. And so when I stepped into the business, my mandate was to expand and grow that. And we're very fortunate that I think our services deliver on what we say they're going to do, but most importantly, that tailwind of rising rates really shifted a lot of the focus back into executing organic revenue growth strategies to create value across portfolio investments. And so that's ultimately how we got to where we're at here today and the journey that we're continuing to execute against.
Thank you. And I think that's so important because I see private equity sponsored firms sometimes that are chasing bolt-on after bolt-on after bolt-on or acquisitions, but their organic business is going in the wrong direction. And it almost feels like that's a recipe for failure versus having a strong organic growth strategy to go with a good bolt-on strategy. But if your organic growth is not working, at the end of the day, you can only fill that so much through trying to substitute through lateral and bolt-ons and so forth. So organic really has to be a foundation to everything that everybody does one way or another. How are go-to-market strategy evolving today for companies? What are you seeing there and how is that changing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we could probably spend the entire session talking specifically about that, but I'll surface up a few points. I think one, there is a tough environment for many businesses because of some of the dislocation in the past few years. Organizations either underperformed and are now chasing to make up that lack of performance given, coming out of the pandemic era, or they significantly overperformed and now have really difficult grow over targets when the overall commercial environment has changed quite a bit as a function of, some of those larger shifts in the market, interest rates rising, talent disjointment. So we're seeing a lot of organizations looking for strategies and ways to actually execute more efficient growth. And our approach to supporting that is to help people embrace new and emerging strategies and tactics, AI being one of them, looking at how they're serving their customers, both the existing client base and new customer acquisitions, but also not losing sight of fundamentals. And more often than not, when we get involved with a mid-sized business who may just received institutional capital, or they're looking to, recapitalize or move from one sponsor to the next, we see some areas of deficiency on fundamentals. And so it's really important to think about it just like you would in your thesis or building a house. You got to have that foundation in place. And so there's always going to be emerging trends and technologies, and they're accelerating so quickly. We use them in everything that we do today and help support our clients execute with those capabilities. But they're only as good as the foundation that they're built on. And so I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
When you talk about that foundation of a sales team or a growth team, how do you think about that for companies, sort of that foundation? Like, how do you size the sales team? How do you think about outbound versus inbound, developing prospects? How do you think about some of those things?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's first and foremost, is your commercial strategy, which is the mix of sales and marketing, is that directly correlated with the business strategy, right? And I think all of our evaluations start there. And we tend to take an inside-out view of an organization. So we like to get very intimate with the management team, get a real good orientation of the business. It's typically over a 30 or 45-day period, so that we have very, very good visibility into where the business is at and where they're looking to go and what the opportunities are, either to correct things to help that or to add things to increase that. So when we think about, what we're looking to accomplish, the fundamentals really come down into a handful of categories. One, are you focused on, from an outbound perspective, talking to the right types of customers, your ICP? Do you have one built? Do you have the right messaging that's actually communicating your value to those individuals or to those organizations? And then are you supporting your business with the right individuals to actually be the conduit to deliver that message? And so, a lot of what we do is look at the team construct, the makeup. Those are some fundamental things that are really important. And we're leveraging, as I mentioned before, we're leveraging a lot of what I would call qualitative and quantitative capabilities to support businesses. We indexed probably close to 4,000 sales professionals in composite proprietary assessment makeups. We've trained over 600,000 sales professionals. And so we have a lot of data. And what we do is help take that data, structure it in a way that's going to be useful for our clients so that they can get to decision points, either validating them or disproving them to make better decisions about the people that are working inside their business and the customers that they're approaching.
And you work with a lot of founder-led businesses that now have a private equity sponsor. How many of those have great clarity about their ideal customer profile? How many sort of are really clear, this is who we're really going after? And how many are still in an evolutionary stage or a constant evolutionary stage and differentiate success based on those that know this is who we're really targeting for our business versus not?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a mix, Scott, to be honest. In some cases, people assume that they know, right? And what we do is help to test those assumptions based on data analysis. In other cases, they really don't have an idea and they're trying to go a little bit too far wide. And where we can help is refocus their attention to help define who that ideal customer is and where they're actually driving value for customers and how to continue to do more and more of that. So it's, there's definitely a correlation. I think the more mature a business is in their journey, the better they have done at figuring that out. The less mature or the more early they are, irrespective of, how long or how short they've been affiliated with a private equity sponsor, we tend to see, a little less confidence in the answers to some of those questions.
In terms of today's world, we've got obviously the last couple of weeks have been just a bit of a combustible period of time. Tariffs, market down, people hunkering down a little bit, but not all that much. But you do see the M&A private equity market going to freeze for a moment. But in terms of organic growth, do you see distinctions out there in different types of companies as to how much they're still just very bullish and plugging forward versus a little bit like a deer in the headlights right now? What are you seeing in the current environment in terms of people assessing their go-to-market strategies? Because business can't stop. They can't stop, even though it can be more challenging at times. What are you seeing out there?
Well, a third of businesses are putting their head in the sand and ignoring it, right? Which I think is a normal human response. A third are paying attention, but not really actioning any type of execution decisions. And then there's a subset of clients that we're working with that have, in conjunction with us, started to get a little bit proactive. And so a good example of that is we're working with a client right now. We've helped solidify their ICP. They have exposure to the current friction in the market. And so what we're doing is we're creating like a prioritized ICP, businesses that are limited in tariff exposure and doubling down on their outbound and go-to-market execution focused on those companies, knowing a couple things. One, they're likely not going to be as impacted. So therefore, decision-making can be more normalized versus just looking at the target prospect database of everyone and anyone. And so they're really time boxing a lot of outbound effort in that context. And the assumption there is they should receive normalized results in pipeline, customer acquisition, and revenue throughput as a result of that, versus continuing to spread their sales resources across the entire sellable addressable market, which has a mix of those companies that do have exposure.
And let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Are there some customers that are saying this provides an opportunity because so many people will freeze up or be so nervous now that if we really get after it, we could develop closer, tighter relationships. And at the end of the day, a lot of this will pass. And if we put ourselves in a good spot, it will be well positioned as things start to rebound. Would you see some customers, that third, sort of really attacking forward and seeing this as an opportunity while the world gets a little nervous?
Yeah, absolutely. Big levers to pull right now. Contract extensions, offers from a marketing capability in terms of decision making now and deferred payment capabilities. People want business booked, And I think revenue leaders, those that are being very strategic, and their partners in the boardroom are looking at it as an opportunity to accelerate growth in the very, very short term. And I'm talking over the next, weeks, if not month, until things potentially calm down or maybe get worse. In either case, you're providing yourself with an opportunity to capitalize on share.
And do you find a spot, exactly to your point, where people have used multiple different resources, they love working with you, things get a little tighter in the environment, and rather than this being a net loser, this ends up being a net winner for a firm like yours. People say, look, we're going to stop spreading resources all over the place to the total addressable market, and let's just work with Sales Empowerment Group to really double down on what we're doing there. How much of that are you starting to see?
Again, it's probably a little too early to give a ton of confidence. When I think about some of the clients that, have prioritized this, we're actively engaged in that dialogue. There's also a major important area of focus is on ensuring you have the right coverage. You see it in the public markets now. People are taking forecasts down. I think it's important to be realistic. If you're going to tighten resourcing, make sure you have the appropriate adjustment in the overall revenue plan and business budget as a result. Many revenue leaders and CEOs, are not thinking about it as holistically. And so when they think about shifting resources or priorities, just understand that that's going to have an impact, not likely tomorrow, but several months from now as a result. So I think we are seeing it to an extent. Some organizations are being very proactive and tapping us to help support those strategies. Others tend to be taking a little bit of a wait and see approach.
No, thank you. And I could see this in the world we're in, where people get clearer about the resources they're going to use. And I could see you guys being in a very winning spot there. What advice would you give to a CEO or a founder or chief growth officer on sort of growth and strategies today and how to approach go-to-market? And also what's working in revenue growth and go-to-market strategies, not necessarily this moment where we're being hit by these tariffs and other sort of uncertainty, but what's been working over the last year, what should continue to work going forward, and what advice would you give to chief growth officers, founders, CEOs, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to talk to your customers and talk to your frontline leaders and to the people that are out there in the market every single day. Be curious before you're critical. That's an important mantra that we have. Truly understand where you're driving value, and then think about ways that you can continue to compound that value in the market. And so, there's definitely an importance on leveraging emerging technology and capabilities, AI, in your strategy and execution. Don't try and do everything all at once. My boss has a good saying. It's like, don't run with scissors, because that can be problematic and very distracting. Try to focus on what you're doing really, really well and continue to drive towards that with the opportunity of expansion. In terms of specific to go to market, ourselves, the companies we're advising and our partners, we're getting really, really focused in delivering value first and ensuring that even in commoditized markets, you have a plan of driving thought capital to your customer base and your potential customer base, ensuring that people look at you as a thought leader in the space and can help provide insight and perspective to improve their business. And so that's always something that I think people can tend to lose sight of, but it's an important one to focus on.
When you talk about the audits that you do or the early reviews you do with clients, do you spend a lot of time trying to identify what's working and what's not working so that they could double down on that versus being all over the place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned earlier, we take an inside out view. So we typically will spend, several weeks with an organization once we're engaged. And the data analysis is a critical component of that. Many of these businesses, as you mentioned, are mid-market sized businesses. They don't have tremendous amount of internal resources. So we try to support them in pulling together information and data that can be usable, and help understand where there's health in the business on the commercial organization and where potentially there could be, some areas of opportunity. And so, as we think about that exercise, that's critically important. Data analysis is first and foremost. From there, we can draw some assumptions, and then we provide a lot of times, what we call like a high-low or a probability index into those assumptions. And we're not talking about a lot. It's typically 2 or 3 things that are executable within several weeks. And then some which tend to move forward into, months, but our total engagements last 12 months. And that involves all things that, we're doing on the execution side, not just consulting, but one of our core components is we own the execution in conjunction with our clients as a way to mitigate risk to them.
When you talk about owning the execution, Sean, what does that look like for a typical client engagement? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's we depending on where they're resource constrained, in many cases we can take an advisory role. We can be the interim CRO. We can support the CRO or sales leadership team with augmented sales talent resources, but we're working very, very tightly correlated with that team and owning the outcomes. And what I mean by that is, we've got that revenue plan that we've helped to solidify with them. And then we're going to resource and staff both restructuring internal resources to align to that, or supporting them with some augmented personnel to help drive towards those outcomes. And ultimately, it's SEG's responsibility to ensure that those targets are hit, or we need to continue to refine as a function of the plan that we've outlaid for business.
And when you work with customers, if you're supplementing them on lead generation, for example, and I'm not sure tell us about that versus all the way through closure versus advising them on how to structure their sales team. Give us a sense of some of the different things that you do with customers. Maybe a couple examples, if you don't mind.
Yeah, and it's a great point to surface up, Scott. So yeah, demand generation, outbound, lead gen. Again, we're going to fill the holes or increase the areas of where opportunity may exist. Anything commercial falls into that category. We have a fully blown marketing and revenue operations team that supports our engagements. So, we work with a business that was an industrial manufacturer, domestically based. 90% of their organization was inbound via their e-commerce channel. And they knew at the time that they were receiving orders from massive size businesses, Walmarts, Targets, et cetera, but they had no actual direct outbound or sales function to meet those customers where they were at and to proactively engage with them. And so part of that process in working with us was to help solidify an appropriate demand generation infrastructure to support them beyond just paid search and their e-commerce channel, and then build a team underneath that to develop an ICP and to develop talk tracks and sales process and sales management and truly build that outbound infrastructure from the ground up. And then once it was fully productive, that client had the opportunity to lift and shift those resources and then infrastructure into their business. And so that was a widely successful engagement for us and a good example of where we did kind of everything under one umbrella.
And this is so typical of some founder-led businesses. They start with inbound demand, but most of us know if you want to build a serious business, you better have outbound too. So you're really targeting the customers you want to target versus the smaller amounts or maybe the unstable amounts that come in through inbound. And when you develop that outbound focus, that makes them a lot less fragile, I take it as well, because they're not just reliant on the phone to ring. They're out there developing relationships, making those relationships more stronger and deeper. In terms of demand generation, what are some of the current trends that you're watching in terms of demand generation? Then I want to ask you about sizing of sales teams versus marketing. And how do you look at that? Does that differ broadly by industry, how you size a sales team? But tell us first, maybe a couple trends in demand generation and outbound for, prospecting and so forth. And then a little bit on sizing of sales teams, how you think about that.
Yeah, sure. As it relates to demand generation, I mean, I think it's really important to provide focus on two types of what we call journeys that exist for potential customers. Some customers are very early in their process, and it's not warranted to engage with them. We call that, early buyer journey work stream. And then there's later buyer journeys who are actually customers that are actually ready to engage. And so really understanding the difference is critically important. I think a lot of organizations fall into the trap of just putting everybody into one bucket. And it's important to, create more consistency in your measurement on separating those out. Buyer intent is really, really important. And so a lot of what we're able to do is to establish strategies that help provide visibility into where and how potential customers are engaging with either your existing customer base, your partners, your assets, your information, or the materials that you're putting out there to provide exposure for your business. And so, those are, I think, two critical things when we think about demand gen that are really important. The old methods of, throw everything against the wall and hope something sticks are still being done every single day. There's a lot of companies that are doing that. I think the challenge is that you get some success, but it's unpredictable, right? So when we think about a true direct sales and commercial organization, what everybody's really after is predictability. Yes, we're going to grow revenue, but we want to be able to do it in a way that we can understand and predict it going forward.
Well, and also what you're talking about when you're throwing everything against the wall and a bunch of different resources or overstaffed, you could be very expensive and inefficient, and your customer acquisition cost, your growth, your intimacy with customers can really suffer. But let me do this. We've got a question from the audience, Sean. Let me interrupt our sort of core track to just ask you this question from the audience. So this is a great question, and I'll probably read the question pretty fully because it's pretty spot on. As automation, technology, AI continue to advance, it's become increasingly difficult for companies to differentiate themselves in the market. Many are trying similar things in terms of go-to-market strategies, and this makes operational efficiency, doing it faster and cheaper, a key competitive advantage. But the question the person asks, and I love this, how do you see this shift towards a lot of people using automation in different ways, impacting innovation and long-term growth? And probably more importantly, how do you advise your clients while using these different resources to continue thinking differently, or to say it a different way, to get closer and closer to customers, even though there's so much out there that's being thrown at customers? How do you sort of advise clients to look at things in an information overload world where everybody's using similar AI tools? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I love that question because it comes up often, right? And particularly in verticals that tend to be a little bit more commoditized. The reality is there's a lot of valuable data and information inside every single business. There is only one business that exists that has the customers that it has. And so that is unique and that is differentiated. And you had asked a question earlier in our discussion about what's the advice that you have to a CEO or growth officers. And I said, talk to your customers, talk to your sales teams. Those engagements and experiences that your organizations have that are part of your client base are unique to them, and they're also unique to you. So while the service of the product may look and feel similar, and maybe the messaging does, change it and talk more about the impact that you have for your customers and less about what it is that you do. And oftentimes, many companies, and we see this with a lot of different websites, it's all about them, right? And a website isn't, a mousetrap, but it is a place that potential buyers and clients will go to get more comfortable and more exposure to who you are. If it's all about you, you're missing a tremendous opportunity. It really should be all about the impact that you're having for them, because that's emotional. And what we know is people make buying decisions based on emotion. They'll substantiate it financially, but the key driver there is the emotion that is elicited and the outcome that's going to be derived from that decision.
But I think your point, and you guys seem to walk this walk as well as anybody I know, of really being customer centric and about the customer. I mean, for a team that is focused on sort of growth, there's nobody that's more client focused on their growth than you folks are. You would hardly know that you're building this crazily successful firm, Sales Empowerment Group, with this sort of humble way that you work so closely with clients and client intimacy and really trying to be client centric. And I think your point is so well taken. There could be all the different information out there, all the different technology out there. But if it doesn't really feel like you're working for the customer and trying to improve what they're doing and help them, then nobody really wants to work with you. And you guys, I think, very much exemplify that effort. Talk for a second as a follow-up to that question. How is artificial intelligence, how is technology impacting some of the go-to-market strategies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's timely. It's the way that AI is operating today is so magnificent. The use cases are abundant and the applications are never ending. And so, today I run a team of 6 AI agents. Our resources across our business, leverage AI in several different categories and capacities. And we help teach our clients on different ways to leverage and use that. We don't think about LLMs and applications like ChatGPT and agents that exist in verticals or specialized functions of, areas of business as displacement technologies. We see them more as accelerants and efficiencies for commercial organizations. And so, the work that used to take a structured team a couple of weeks to do can be done in 30 minutes. And so companies that are embracing this and leaning in and testing and learning, it doesn't have to be a large investment. It really is an investment of time and the commitment to trial and error and finding what works for you. There's a ton of use cases around AI applications today that work for business A that are not going to be effective for business B. And there's a lot of inputs that are going to really center around that. If you have a high transaction, high volume organization with low ACVs, there's a framework and a structure of how you should think about AI to support your commercial organization. If you're on the other end of that spectrum and you have more of an enterprise or low volume type of commercial organization with very high ACVs, that framework looks completely different. And so I think it's really important to understand, again, going back to fundamentals, what is the business strategy? Do you have that foundation in place? Once you're equipped with data and information, you can start to then layer in efficiency capabilities to really drive forward the organization.
Thank you. And in this world of AI and outreach, automated outreach, all kinds of other things, how important is the sort of real one-on-one contact from business to business versus all technology driven? And how's that mix of sort of people to technology as you interact with customers and people on the other side of the equation?
Yeah, it's a great question. The old way of, pure volume play, we see that as a diluting effort. When we think about where organizations can truly accelerate growth with AI is to supplement, again, research, analysis, enablement, training, reinforcement. There's just a tremendous amount of use case that exists. And so I think it's critical to understand that AI and the AI technologies that are supporting these types of alignments are really, really important. You have to trust and verify. You can't just take whatever ChatGPT or Bard or whatever platform you're using spits out. You need to ensure that you refine it and that you've got a good process around how you're leveraging that for your business. Everybody's looking for an easy button. It is additional work, and it should be directly aligned with how your people in your organization are approaching your customers and potential customers, how your customers are engaging, and everything in between.
And I love what you just said, that everybody's looking for an easy button. At the end of the day, truly building a business, I mean, you could use an outside resource like Sales Empowerment Group, who's as good as they come, it really help to accelerate and strengthen your business. At the same time, between you and the customer, someone's going to have to really work hard for customers and take care of their customers to make this work. I mean, there's not like AI, ChatGPT, all these things. They can accelerate, they can help, but you still have to have really bright, really hardworking people trying to make it go. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're ways away from needs being input and solutions being executed without human involvement. I would argue that we'll likely never get there, maybe at some point, but when it comes to the types of decisions that impact both one individual, but then also an organization as a whole, that human engagement and that human element is going to be really important. I think the opportunity today for businesses is to understand when is the right moment to engage with contact. Those statistics I think are out there and they're continuously updated. So, don't hold my feet to the fire here, but something of like north of 80% of purchase decisions are made in advance of a conversation, right? And if you just take inventory on how the last major purchase decision you made and back it from the time that you made that decision until you started the process, you're probably going to confirm that that's how you went about your journey. And so I think it's important as an organization is to meet your customers where they are, provide the type of information and insight that is going to be helpful and beneficial to a potential customer or client or an existing customer or client. Do it with confidence, do it with defensible information so that when they're ready to have a conversation, you're now going to substantiate what they already know and provide that added layer of confidence to help them make a sound decision and provide the type of confidence that you're going to deliver on what they're looking for in a solution.
And Sean, you've been in sort of the growth business for a long time. Bigger organizations, the biggest organizations can be very systematic and disciplined about their purchase decisions. In mid-sized organizations, small organizations, often a shorter sales cycle. You could have a founder who's more quick to try different things than other things. How do you sort of look at those issues in terms of the discipline of certain organizations? We've worked over the years with GE, for example, and GE back in the day had a very disciplined supply purchasing perspective, very, very clear about procurement. There are this many vendors on the list, and that was going to be it. What do you see out there today in the world, that discipline versus non-discipline? You talk about meeting a customer where they're at. Obviously, some chains, Walmart's known for everybody comes to Fayetteville or Bensenville or whatever it is. I'm spacing today, but how do you see that discipline amongst buyers, and how does that work? And what is it? What's the mix out there in terms of large companies, mid-sized companies, in terms of sales cycles and discipline, and versus willing to buy based on, okay, we had a conversation today, we're ready to try. What's your sense of that?
Yeah, it's actually a unique question, Scott. I think what we've found is that even in mid and smaller businesses, organizations have taken more of a share the risk in decision making versus some of the probably latter portion of how that structure worked a few years back. And what I mean by that is, enterprise decisions, there's usually multi-threading, there's multiple committees, you've got to address the needs of both the ultimate decision group as well as the users of product and services. And then generally smaller mid-sized businesses might have been a little bit more nimble. We're actually seeing that sales cycles are elongated across the spectrum, both small, medium-sized business as well as enterprise. And we think that's an outcome of the shift in talent from large enterprises coming more and more into the mid-market, particularly in private equity, right? So again, going back to the customers that we support, many of them are private equity-backed businesses. A lot of those leaders that have stepped into that organization to help drive growth have bigger business experience. And so they're comfortable with that type of structure and that orientation. And so, the outcome of that is more decision-making by committee, more of enterprise-type buying examples and environments. And so it's really important to understand buying criteria for a customer. Hey, as fundamental as training your sales team on who are the people that are going to be involved? What are the critical milestones that we need to address to ensure? What is your time frame? Like that qualification is really, really important so that you can create a mutual action plan and help your customers actually be more efficient buyers than what potentially they may be doing without you.
But I think that's really well stated. Back in the day, not too long ago, a CEO would engage with a new type of software and say, we're going all in on that software. And then that CEO would find that nobody in the organization would use that software. So even the most confident CEO learned he or she better get buy-in from the organization, not just make those choices themselves and really be in tune with who the users are going to be and so forth. The point is really well taken, and probably more people wanting to consult internally before just making a decision. In the old days, people were very brand name conscious. For example, if in the law firm business for a certain type of deal, you might only use Kirkland or Skadden because you wanted to make sure you could defend it to the board if something went wrong. And similarly across the board with the big four accounting firms and so forth. In your business today, how much are people very brand centric, or has the brand world just changed so much that people are open to other types of solutions other than a Fortune 500 solution, Fortune 200 solution? I don't know if you know that's a fair question, Sean, but any thoughts on that in terms of how brand centric people are versus not?
No, I think it's a fair question. We've got some perspective on that. Brand equity is always going to be important, particularly when, the higher the decision risk, the higher the importance and substantiation of who you're partnering with to solve a problem. What we're seeing, though, is that many organizations and executives and business leaders are understanding that there is also a lot of knowledge and capability in small and mid-size boutique, very, very specified professionals and resources that can drive a ton of value. And so, that is a balance that needs to be weighed by the customer or by the business who's thinking about whatever initiative they want to execute. And there's certainly going to be pros and cons. Typically bigger, more well-known brands are going to be a premium. That calculation needs to tie out in terms of value. And so when you think about, large organizations who tend to command a premium in the market, if that value equation is sufficient, then ultimately you're in a good position. If what you're receiving as a result of high brand equity, larger businesses is not as valuable as potentially a more specialized resource, then you're obviously going to need to think about that decision a little bit more carefully.
Thank you very, very much. Talk a little bit about, Sean, what industries do you work with? Are there specific verticals you work with more than others? And any thoughts there? And then I'll ask you a couple more questions too.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to think about where and how SEG can be helpful to an organization is we work fairly democratically across all B2B sectors. We are not today, as it relates to industry or sectors, closely tied to consumer-based organizations. And I think we can offer perspective and insight, but the B2B motion from a commercial perspective is very different than the B2C one. We know what we're good at, and we're sticking to that.
Thank you very, very much. And Sean, what are you most excited about this year? Where are you most focused and excited, other than the market maybe starting to rebound a little bit today? But other than that, what are you most focused on exactly? We'll see if that holds. What are you most focused on and excited about this year?
I'm excited to continue on the journey that we're on, and to help make a positive impact for our clients, our partners, the people that we work with inside the business. If we're successful at that, we're going to be successful in our growth strategy. And ultimately, it's been a fun ride up until this point, and I'm really looking forward to continue to grow the business moving forward.
Thank you. You folks have done a remarkable job. Where can people find out more, Sean, about Sales Empowerment Group and what you do? Where can people learn more about it?
Well, you can see more about what we do and who we are on our website. And I'm pretty active, widely out there on LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with all of you. Shoot me a note, and we can have a conversation.
Sean, thank you so much for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. I know we'll see Sean and some of his colleagues at the McGuire Woods Healthcare Private Equity Conference, May 14th and 15th. Sean, your team are free to come, no charge. We want to have you there to visit with people and meet people. So thank you so much. Other people that are interested, let us know. We'll have our next webinar May 7th. I've got one other question from an audience member before I let you go. Remote work environments versus hybrid work environments. Any thoughts on you evaluate sales teams? How much strength there is there? I know sometimes the big boiler room sales rooms, you probably see less and less of those in the B2B climates, but even the 10-person sales team that's all in one place. What are you seeing in terms of remote versus hybrid versus in-person sales teams? Any thoughts there, or has that world just changed so much? What do you see out there?
It's definitely changed, and we've seen more and more of our clients want resources near or close to office locations so that they can be visible. What we provide advisement around is, depending on the role type and the seniority, I think it has a direct correlation. Those that are further along in their professional career, if they've been successful and can substantiate that success, they're going to likely feel like they've earned the right to have that as an option. Whereas when we're working with a lot of entry level or lower mid-level professionals and resources, we encourage clients and them to create an environment where they can easily collaborate in person and virtually. I think, ultimately it's going to come down to the business objective and what the growth requirement is. There's a lot of great talent that's out there in the market, and remote work is an opportunity to tap into talent pools that maybe prior to that shift were not as feasible. So I think it's careful evaluation and looking at the business and the demand and making informed decisions about it.
Sean, I know I've got to let you go, but I've got one more audience question if you're okay.
Yeah, fire away.
Great. So the next question is from one of my favorite people, actually, great business person. How are ideal customer profiles and personas evolving with AI resources? And maybe not just ideal customer profiles, but how do you sort of synthesize to get to that ideal customer profile? And how are AI resources helping you better target the ideal customer profile?
Yeah, this is a great question. Building personas and being up to speed on how a certain role type is being impacted by AI is just as important as leveraging AI to help support that construct. And so a good example of that is, in the commercial organization, you're seeing what used to be completely separate functions of sales and marketing now becoming more and more blended, right? And the necessity for efficiency is to have those functions operating very, very correlated and tightly intertwined for a multitude of reasons. So as you look at building out ICPs and leveraging AI to do that, the inputs are more important than the outputs. And so creating the right type of data and information on who the target profile is going to be really, really important. And it's a great use case for AI applications. If you pull 25 people and the type of roll down from LinkedIn and load that into an AI application to spit out commonalities or consistent traits and attributes across that subset of population, you can quickly get to a point of understanding what the difference is and the items that are consistent for that type of persona is going to be. And that should then move further into building out your ICP in a substantiated way.
Again, Sean Carson, Sales Empowerment Group, really just about the best in the business of what they do. Sean, thank you so much for joining us on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.